Hey guys, we're back for another episode of the $1 Million Case Study, Season 4, where we're launching and scaling a physical products business to $1 million in revenue. Today's episode, we're gonna be talking about how to ship your goods into Amazon. Or, Rolando, you're gonna talk about that, right?
I don't know if I'm ready to do that, man. Why don't you talk about it?
I would prefer to bring in an expert for this one. Wow. Oh, that was easy. What's up, Michael?
Hey, how you doing, guys?
Happy to have you.
Hey, happy to be here. My name is Mike Gallardo. I'm from Flexport, and super excited to be here today to teach you about shipping into Amazon.
So Michael, so we have some goods in China. We want to get them shipped into the Amazon warehouses. Where do we begin?
A good place to begin is the weight of the shipment. So if your shipment is 200 kilograms or more, that's when you want to engage with a freight forwarder. If your shipment's less than 200 kilograms, then it's best to stick with your supplier who's going to leverage DHL or Air Express to air ship it in. It's going to be less money for you and better for your business, and that's where I would start.
Cool. So to clarify there, if we use something like UPS or TNT or DHL or any of those, then that's just a door-to-door shipment, just like we would expect if we were shipping something from, my house to someone else's house in the States. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. There's not a lot of coordination that needs to happen there because the shipment is so small, and they're going to handle it door to door.
Cool. And then if it's over 200 kilograms, that's when I want to use a freight forwarder like Flexport to help me with the shipment process, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because then there's customs declaration, there's more complexity, and you need a partner that's going to help you manage that entire process.
Do you think it's possible for anyone to do that themselves, or would that be just like too overwhelming and too challenging to do?
I would not recommend that at all. There's a lot of complexity, a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things you got to do with your Amazon business. And so trying to manage the logistics, you should really bring in an expert to help you with that.
Okay, Michael, so our shipment's going to be over 200 kilograms. So when do we decide if we're going to go with air or sea shipment?
That's a great question. It really depends on the price and the transit time. So with air shipping, it's much more expensive, but it's quicker. So if you're looking for a ballpark there, this is just a rough estimate, but an air shipment's going to be 8 to 10 days. The price is going to be about $5 per kilogram as an estimate, whereas an ocean shipment is going to be roughly $450 per CBM and take 30 to 40 days. So if you're really trying to get your product in quickly, you don't mind paying additional cost for that speed, then you can go with air. But if you're not really in a rush and you want to take some time and maybe take the less expensive option, then I would go with sea. So it depends on your product, how heavy it is. There's a couple factors like that, but those are some good guidelines to think about between air and sea.
So Mike, let's dig into these ocean shipments a little bit more. I think as a new Amazon seller, this is something that's like a little bit scary to people and they don't quite understand. Can you just try to explain to us a little more in layman's terms, what happens during a ocean shipment process?
Yeah, the most typical ocean shipment that I see is an LCL shipment. So That's less than a container load. So you're going to be in an LCL shipment if your shipment is less than 18 CBMs. And the way
CBMs is what?
Cubic meter. So Think about it as the volume that your shipment takes up as opposed to the weight.
Okay.
And so if you're in that category, what that means is that a bunch of shipments are going to get aggregated together to fit into a container. And then that container is going to be sent over to the United States, taken to a CFS, which is a container freight station. So imagine all those shipments getting unloaded, prepped for Amazon, and then sent to the different fulfillment centers. So that's what happens most of the time. And that's why it's great to have a freight forwarder because they can manage that process. A lot of times it's just going to be their own clients that they're putting into the container. So there's a lot less ambiguity. People shouldn't be scared because that whole process is managed end to end.
Okay, so does that usually add a little bit extra time to the time frame?
Yes, that can add 3 to 5 days for that to be gated in to aggregate all the shipments together and be put into a container. And that's a little bit different than a full container shipment.
Okay.
Again, if your shipment's over 18 CBMs, that's when I'd be working with your freight forwarder to see if a full container makes sense. But that means that you're the only person in that container. And you have a couple different options there too, where you can take that container directly to an Amazon warehouse. You don't have to unload it before going there because it's just you in the container.
Okay, so I guess if you're right on the fence, then it would be probably, or as far as the price goes, it'd probably be preferable to have a full container load, both because you save time and there's maybe less of a chance of goods getting damaged since they're being handled less. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say that's accurate. And I'd also say if you're right around that 18 CBM, then reach out to your freight forwarder, have them give you both the pricing for less than container and a full container. So you have all the data in front of you and you can make the decision that's best for your business.
Cool. So I think the audience at this point probably has lots of questions, but let's even rewind a little bit more. How do Amazon sellers get their goods from the factory into the container if they choose to send it like an ocean shipment?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It depends first on your shipping terms. So if you think once your shipment is done being manufactured, someone has to truck that shipment to the port.
All right.
Now, if you have Ex Works terms, that means that all your supplier has to do is make your shipment. And then the freight forwarder is going to come in, pick it up, take it to the port, manage the whole process from that port to the United States, getting it to the warehouse to get ready for Amazon, and then taking it to Amazon. Now, if it's FOB, which is free on board, that means your supplier not only has to make the goods, but then take those goods from their warehouse to the port. And then the freight forwarder takes over from the port. So when you're working with your supplier, you definitely want to know and understand and get your shipping terms. And when you see your per unit manufacturing cost on FOB, it's typically higher because the manufacturer is handling that trucking to the port. And so they put that into the per unit cost. And that's typically why you see that a little bit higher than Ex Works. There's no preference between those two. As if I can kind of tell at your next question, which one should I get, FOB or FOB or Ex Works? If you want to pick one, I would pick FOB because you kind of ensure that the supplier can export it and has those systems in place. It's more of a reputable factory and they have those pieces under control. It's not a deal breaker if it's Ex Works only. And then typically too with FOB, your suppliers have those kind of local trucking relationships and you can save a little money on that piece as well.
So we decide on the keyboard tray, and it's about 3 to 4 weeks out before it's completed, the manufacturing is completed. What should I be thinking about right now when it comes to shipping?
I'm glad you're 3 to 4 weeks out because that's the perfect time to engage with a freight forwarder. The main reason is that you want to really submit a quote, get the pricing, and book the shipment 7 to 10 days before it's completed. And the reason for that is it gives the freight forwarder time to get the dimensions, make contact with your supplier, arrange everything like we talked about, how to get it from them all the way to the port, and then also too to reserve space on the carrier. So make sure that you have space allocated for you. And when we're in times, like right now, which is peak season, it's very busy, space is tight. So 7 to 10 days, you really want to hit that. So engage with your freight forwarder, lock that in so you can have that relationship going and everyone's aligned. And then on top of that, I would say you also want to be thinking about setting up your inspection for your shipment. I recommend personally, this is just my recommendation, but always get your shipment inspected. It doesn't even matter how many times you've done a shipment with this supplier. If you can imagine, every supplier is a business, things can be changing, and you just want to make sure that the quality of your product that you've been working so hard for is top notch.
So Mike, let's talk about pricing a little bit. Can you talk about all the different costs involved and what people need to be thinking about?
Yeah, so I would break it down into 2 parts. So if you're just looking to get a rough estimate to see, is this product even viable? I would use the following as, an estimate. So if you're gonna do an air shipment, it's gonna be $5 per kg. Okay. So that's the weight of the air shipment. Ocean's a little different, a little bit more complicated, but that's the CBM, so the cubic meters, that's the volume. Okay. And I would estimate $450 per CBM for an ocean shipment. Okay. So that'll give you a rough estimate. It'll let you know if you're in the ballpark. It should be pretty apparent with that, okay, this product has good margin and I should move forward. The second part is when you actually engage with the freight forwarder and you get the pricing. The question I get all the time is this all encompassing? Are there any hidden charges or things of that nature? And the question and the answer to that is the freight price should be broken down each line item and be very transparent. But with any freight forwarder you use, there's going to be a few costs that are not included. Okay. And that's simply because the freight forwarder doesn't know the cost of those items at that time. And there's 3 main ones that come to mind. All right. The first one is insurance. So I highly recommend insuring your product every time. The cost is very low. Roughly, let's say it's 0.4% of the total insured amount. So that's less than 0.5%. So let's say for a $5,000 shipment, that's going to be about $20. So a very low cost to insure the goods that you've been working hard for.
And that's would be if they got damaged in transit, that insurance would cover that?
Yeah, exactly. And that can happen at any stage. A lot of hands are touching it. Imagine it getting, taken to the CFS that we talked about, put in a container with other shipments, put on the boat, unloaded. There's just a lot of hands in there, and damage can happen. And you just want to be protected in case that does occur.
Cool.
The second one is going to be the final trucking from the warehouse in the United States that your freight forwarder takes it to Amazon picking it up and taking it to their warehouse. And so the reason why freight forwarders should be setting it up this way is that Amazon has very deep discounts with those trucking partners, whether it's LTL or a parcel delivery like FedEx. And so they're going to give you a lower price. So most freight forwarders shouldn't be doing that final trucking and have Amazon do it. And the price,
and that's booked through Seller Central, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So that final trucking from that warehouse to the Amazon warehouses is done in Amazon Seller Central, and you can actually go into your shipment plan and get an estimate of those costs as well. And the last one, this is the big one, is, customs duties.
Yeah.
So as I'm sure everyone knows, every product has its own HTS code, which basically tells customs what this product is. And every code has a percentage attached to it, which, customs is going to use to determine how much duties are on this shipment. And that's the commercial invoice amount. So let's take an example. If your shipment's $1,000 that you got from your supplier and the duties percentage is 10%, then that would be $100 for the duties.
All right.
And those are the three main things that won't be included on the quote and added in later.
Cool. So let's dig into this a little bit more. I think some of the audience is probably a little bit overwhelmed by all these. Like, hey, how do I find out how to do all these different things? Let's start off. The first thing we talked about was price of the shipment. You gave the ballpark or rule of thumb of $5 per kilogram for air cargo, correct?
Correct.
$450 per cubic meter for an ocean shipment, correct? And when you said $5 per kilogram, that's like air cargo, right? That would be different than if I was using FedEx or DHL or something?
Correct. Yeah.
Do you know any rules of thumb for if I were to use one of those air couriers?
Yeah, so that would be more around $8 per kilo.
Okay, so it might be a little bit faster, but it's $8 per kilogram as opposed to $5. Is that correct?
Correct.
Cool. Okay, so you spoke about a few things like insurance and like HS codes. I imagine people are overwhelmed. Like, wait a second, I don't have insurance. How do they go about getting that?
Yeah, so a freight forwarder is going to be partnered with an insurance broker, and so it can just be included automatically with most freight forwarders. So you'll see a line item that says, freight insurance, what the percentage is. If you don't see that line item on the invoice or the quote that you get, make sure to ask for it and see what the percentage is so you can have a rough idea of what that cost is going to be.
Cool. And Orlando might be thinking like, hey, I don't know my HS code for keyboard trays. How do we go about finding that?
Yeah, there's a lot of good tools out there. We actually have our own tool, which is the duty calculator. We can go in, type in what your product is, and you can search and pick the code, and then that will give you the percentage. It's not, final until a customs broker really goes in and takes a look, but if you're looking for an estimate, that's a great place to start.
Okay, cool. So, we're describing all this in detail, which I think is really helpful for people. But if they forget certain parts or don't understand certain parts, should freight forwarders be able to kind of hold their hand through the process, especially during the first few shipments? Or do you think that they really need to go in kind of knowing all these things and knowing what they're talking about?
Yeah, I think it's good to have a good foundation just so you're kind of in the know and your expectations are aligned with what's going to happen. But ultimately, the freight forwarder is there to be your partner with your business as you grow and scale, whether it's your first shipment or your 100th shipment. They should be involved, helping you, communicating proactively. A lot of things we've talked about, you can kind of tell the freight forwarder kind of takes it all under their roof and handles everything from A to Z. So the insurance, figuring out what the duties are, moving the shipment, even communicating with your supplier to make sure that they're bringing it to the port on time, getting the shipment schedule. They should be taking care of all of that. So you can ask questions and look at things as they're happening, but the freight forwarder is definitely the partner to walk you through the process.
Okay, great. Because I think people listen to an episode like this they're like, oh no, I need to figure out customs or whatever else. But that's not really the case. What I always tell people is you just kind of hire a freight forwarder and they handle all like the paperwork and all the different things associated with it. And that's why it's like almost impossible to do this yourself. It would be very difficult if you don't have like experience, with all this, right?
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to get a degree in shipping and, hold up your launch process to dig into customs. And I mean, they're just, licensed professionals that are with the freight forwarder that are going to help you through that. So, getting the kind of the rules of thumb and the expectations is great, but having a partner that handles that is the best use and the best person to handle that part of the process for sure.
Great.
Now, does the freight forwarder also handle the inspecting the initial products to ensure that they're high quality or that they're, to the quality that you want?
I'm really glad you asked that. So inspection is going to be done by an independent third party like Topwin or V-Trust or UL, and they're going to actually go in, inspect the products, and then let you know what that inspection looks like, whether it passed or failed. So those are the recommended inspection companies that we recommend. It would not actually be with a freight forwarder.
Cool. And for those of you guys who aren't familiar with the inspection reports, it's actually, I really enjoy getting them because it shows a whole bunch of pictures of all your goods and the different tests that they run on it. So it's very helpful because one, you're verifying the quality of these goods, but it's also kind of just nice, like see that shipment for the first time and them weighing all the different things, and you can get a better understanding of the quality of the factory.
Yeah, especially if you're not shipping, to your house to look at, the product. They provide very in-depth reports, and the great thing is that those reports and what they look for is customizable, right? So there's something very particular that, say, your competitor isn't doing well that you want to make sure you're doing very well. You can have them test for that, and then it'll lay it out there right for you in the sample. This is how it did, and whether it met the criteria you set out ahead of time.
You spoke about shipping to my house. Let's dig into that a little more. Is that required? Do I have to ship the goods to my house? When would I want to ship the goods to my house?
No, so it's not required to ship to your house. A lot of people shipping to Amazon just ship directly to Amazon. So it's the most cost effective. Because if you imagine, instead of trucking it to your house and then you having to manage that end piece of trucking it to the warehouses, it's going to go straight through to Amazon. Your freight forwarder can handle that end to end. Some people do that because they're excited about their product and they want to see it, or maybe they want to inspect it. If you're going to inspect it, I recommend doing that on your supplier's side, because if your shipment gets all the way to your house and now you're finding some issues, what do you do with those products?
Right.
If you catch it early, then you can have them take out the units and replace them with new ones, or just take them out, period, and just ship in a little bit less. So that's what I would recommend. And so, yeah, I would take it straight through to Amazon.
And those would be things that you would stipulate in your contract that if it's not meeting your expectations, then of course that's on the manufacturer, correct?
Yeah, I'd say, treat the relationship with your supplier, like everyone you have in the process, is as a partner. So proactively communicate, hey, here is what I'm sending to the inspection company. Here's what I want them to be looking at. That way they know what to expect and what is important to you. And I have heard of, clients negotiating as well and saying, hey, here is the percentage of units that they sample that have to pass, and if that doesn't happen, then we're going to remove the units and replace them and do a second inspection. And that cost of the second inspection would actually be removed from the final invoice with the supplier. I can't guarantee that every supplier is going to be okay with that, but I would at least try and see what they say. Hey, what's up, Freedom Builders? I know the shipping information can be pretty complicated. So if you have any questions at all, please submit them in the comments section below, and I will personally jump in and answer them for you. It doesn't matter if it's on customs or shipping or Amazon delivery, I will personally get in there and get my hands dirty. So please submit your question in the comments section below. Would love to help.
So by now we've covered the big picture as far as shipping goods from China or overseas into Amazon. But now let's dig into Amazon Seller Central and look at some of the actual tactics of creating these shipments. Now that I'm thinking about this, I imagine the chat box at this point is probably lit up with people asking for any type of special deal or discount from Flexport. I hate to put you on the spot, but can you hook us up?
Yeah, well, let me text my boss and see what he says. I promise by the end of this episode, I'll have something for you.
Cool. So stay to the end of this episode and we'll let you guys know if Flexport can hook us up. And by this point, we're putting the pressure on them. So open up Amazon Seller Central, go under the Inventory tab and click on Manage Inventory. On the right-hand side, there's a drop-down. Click the drop-down and click Send/Replenish Inventory. There's a few questions right off the bat. One, you want to create a new shipment plan. There's a ship from address that you'll have to enter here. And Mike, can you talk to us a little bit about what to use for the ship from address in different scenarios?
Absolutely. So the big picture is that you want to put the address where Amazon's going to pick your shipment from up from in the United States.
Okay.
So you do not want to put your supplier's address. So as we talked about, the freight forwarder is going to take it to their warehouse in the United States. That's the address you want to get from your freight forwarder to put as the ship from. The reason being is that if you put your supplier's address overseas, Amazon's not going to really know where it's going to come through, and you could get an Amazon location, say, in the middle of the United States. Whereas if you would have used your freight forwarder's address, you'd get something on the West Coast, which would save you money because there's less traveling time.
Good point. And I think some people are under the impression that if they put their factory's address, that they could use Amazon's discounted rates to, say, ship UPS from the factory into Amazon. Do you know whether or not that's true?
That is not true. So that final trucking and using that, the discounts that they have, that can be set up from any location in the United States. So if we brought it into, say, Los Angeles, for example, that trucking from Amazon would pick it up at that warehouse in Los Angeles and then take it to their warehouse.
Great. So from the ship from address, I do use Flexport, so I have their address here. As far as packing type, you're going to want to click case packed products unless you have more than one ASIN in the case, which is usually not the case, no pun intended, if you're shipping from your factory and if they're packing your goods in the factory. Next thing you do is continue to the shipping plan. Here you'll need to know how many units are in each case and how many cases you're sending in. You'll be able to ask your factory or supplier how many units they pack per case. If this is the first time that you're sending in the product, which is probably the case, Amazon may ask you for the dimensions and weight of each case when you're on this page. The next thing you do is click continue. On this screen, it's asking you who preps. And what it's talking about here is who does things like putting your goods into a plastic bag or putting bubble wrap around it. And you're always gonna wanna ask your factory to do this instead of Amazon. The factory's rates are gonna be much cheaper, oftentimes free, where Amazon's gonna charge you for doing this type of prep. On this Seller Central page, which we'll link to in the description below, you can see all the different types of prep services that Amazon provides and their costs associated with them. The most common ones are going to be if you have a plush item or a kid's toy and the packaging doesn't cover all of the product, then you'll need to put a poly bag over it and put a suffocation warning on the poly bag. The next most common one is bubble wrapping very fragile items. And something else to keep in mind is if I were to simplify or generalize a lot of their packaging prep requirements, it's essentially that your product just needs to be durable. If they were to drop it from waist height, it can't just explode open or the product can't get really damaged when that happens. All of Amazon's packaging and prep requirements are on this page, which we'll also link to in the description below. And they've even included some nice little videos showing the different types of prep being required. So hopefully you realize this in enough time and have your factory do this prep for you. This page is talking about who's going to apply the FNSKU labels to the packaging. Now, the FNSKUs are Amazon's unique identifier barcodes that when scanned, their system associates with your product. This is different than a UPC code or an EAN. You do want to use FNSKU labels as opposed to UPC or EAN because that way your inventory won't be commingled with others. I recommend that you have your factory print the FNSKUs directly on your product packaging so that your product doesn't need to be labeled. So for here, you're gonna select merchant because you'll have already printed the FNSKU onto your packaging, click continue. And what you'll find on this screen is Amazon's asked me to ship my goods into 3 different distribution centers. The question I oftentimes get is, how do I know which Amazon distribution center to send my goods into? And the answer is Amazon tells you on this page. Unfortunately, you don't get to choose which distribution center you want to send your goods into.
So this is actually why using the ship from address of your freight forwarder is so important. It won't guarantee that you'll only get one warehouse, but it increases the likelihood versus your supplier's location. When you use your supplier's location, there's a greater likelihood that you could get split up into multiple locations, as we see here, or taken to places in the middle of the country.
Now, if I were to get a bunch of warehouses that were on, say, the East Coast of the US, would Flexport or other freight forwarders adjust to what port the goods are shipped to so they'd be closer to those?
Exactly. So when you create your quote with your freight forwarder, you would provide the Amazon warehouse locations that your shipment is going to. Then the freight forwarder can look at those locations and see, should this be going to the East Coast or maybe through Florida? They're always going to pick what is best for you. And so that's why getting this information is important as well.
Good point. A question I oftentimes get is, when can I create the shipment plan, or how far in advance can I create it? And as far as I know, these never expire. So you can create these months or maybe even a year in advance, as far as I know. So go ahead and feel free to create the shipment plan now, even if your goods aren't going to be finished being manufactured for a month or 2 or even 3 months from now. The next step is going to be to approve these shipments, and you don't really have any options to not send your goods to one of these distribution centers. Like I said, Amazon tells you which distribution centers you're sending your goods into, so you're just going to have to approve them. On this page where we can view the shipments, we can see how many units or how many cases are going to each of these respective warehouses. And if I click on the Work on Shipment button, you're then taken to the Send and Replenish Inventory page. And on here, big picture, what we're looking at here is how to get our goods from the freight forwarder's distribution center into Amazon's distribution center. And you'll notice here that there's 2 main shipping methods. One's the small parcel delivery, and the other one's a LTL, which is a less than truckload. Do you want to walk us through each of those methods a little bit?
Yeah, a good rule of thumb is you want to know how many cartons you're shipping into that individual warehouse.
Okay.
So if it's less than 30 cartons, you're going to use SPD.
Okay.
If it's greater than 30 cartons, then you can use LTL. The big difference is that with LTL, imagine that's when it's getting palletized, saran wrapped. There's that process to it. And that's when you would go between the two. The thing to know though, is that SPD is going to be more expensive, but it's definitely going to be quicker. So you're looking at 2 to 3 business days with SPD, where LTL can be 2 to 3 weeks. And in peak season and busy times, it can even be 4 to 5 weeks we've seen in the highest peak times. So that's something to consider if you do an ocean shipment and you want to get your shipment in quicker, and you're not really concerned with paying an additional amount, then you'd select SPD. Whereas if it's an ocean shipment and you don't mind it taking longer to get in, then you would use LTL.
Great. So if I use SPD, then I can use Amazon's deeply discounted rates, right? Through UPS or FedEx,
Exactly.
typically UPS. And with an LTL, that's when the freight forwarder is unpacking the goods out of the container, putting them onto pallets, saran wrapping them and wrapping them up, and then they get picked up by a big truck and trucked in, correct?
Correct. So Amazon works with a lot of different LTL truckers. They have a whole network, and then they're going to use that network to pick up the shipment and deliver it to their warehouse.
Great. And you can book and pay for these shipments inside of Seller Central, and that's how you get the best rates. From what I've seen, they're quite a bit cheaper than what anyone else can provide. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. My wife actually just sent in one package in just a normal delivery, and it was much more expensive than what you would see in Seller Central. So they're definitely discounted.
So Mike, we want to know, what is it that we should do with our keyboard tray? How should we divide our packaging?
Yeah, so if you saw on the previous page, you had 3 distribution centers. There's 27 cases going to one, 32 going to another, and then 41 going to the last one. So the one that's 27, I would send in by SPD, and then the other 2, I would use LTL.
Excellent. So for this first one, we selected the one that has 27 cartons. We can see that because we have 270 units. We know there's 10 in each carton. So for this shipment, I've selected SPD. I typically just default to UPS, but either of them work fine. Down here, it's going to be put in multiple boxes. I have 27 cartons with 10 units in each box, and I'm gonna let Amazon know that. So I have 10 units per box, 27 boxes. Amazon's now asking for the box weight and the box dimensions. And for me, since my cartons are my boxes, it's gonna be the same thing. And the factory can provide you with those attributes, the box weight and the box dimensions. So I'm gonna enter some dummy values for this example. And then click confirm. To get my shipping charges from Amazon, I'll just now click calculate. And this is what they're going to charge me to ship these 27 cartons via UPS. And if you're familiar with shipping other goods through UPS, you'll know that these rates right here for $144 would be much cheaper than what I'd find by, say, going to a UPS store. If I click this box and do accept charges, I'll now be charged, and then I have the ability to print off those box labels. Once you have those box labels, I recommend you give those box labels to your factory and have them put the shipping labels on your cartons before they even load them up into the container. Do you agree with this?
I definitely agree. So that way, once they arrive to the United States, imagine the warehouse is going to take those units in those cases out of the container. They're already labeled. Typically, they're going to have a dedicated UPS and FedEx pickup every day. All they have to do is take those cartons, give them to FedEx, and off and away they go.
And there's usually a cost savings associated with this as well. Most freight forwarders charge to apply labels onto your cartons for you, whereas I've never had a factory charge me any additional cost for putting the labels on there. So all you do is click accept charges, print box labels, then you would then have 27 labels. You would apply one label to each individual box. I don't want to be charged, so I'm not going to click this, but let's go back, work on another shipment, and show you how to set up an LTL shipment. For this second example, there's 32 cases, and Mike recommends anything over 30 cases being sent LTL. Since it's right at the limit, it would probably be fine to ship this SPD, but let's just give you an example of LTL as well. So you want to click on LTL for less than truckload. I always leave it as the default, which is Amazon's partnered carrier. You're then going to scroll down. Again, we're shipping this in multiple boxes. And in this example, we're using 10 units per carton. So the shipment quantity is 320 units. So that means I have 32 cartons and 10 units per carton. I'm going to confirm that. And you'll see this screen looks a little bit different than the small parcel screen. So from here, there again are going to be box labels that go on each individual carton, but those aren't going to be UPS or FedEx labels. Instead, those are going to be labels that let Amazon's distribution centers know what's inside of that particular carton. When I click on generate box labels, that gives me a PDF with the different labels available in it.
Yeah, so one thing first before that is, when to palletize. It's very important to only have your supplier palletize if your goods are fragile. Otherwise, you want your freight forwarder to palletize it according to Amazon's rules and regulations once it reaches the United States. And that also saves you on shipping costs because there's not as much weight on your shipment as it's coming from overseas.
That's a good tip. And just so you guys understand, when it's not palletized in China or overseas, that just means all the loose cartons are loaded into this container, correct?
Correct. Exactly. And then once you get to this part, since you won't know the exact dimensions of the pallets until it actually gets to the United States, your freight forwarder palletizes it at their warehouse, you can reach out to your freight forwarder and ask them to give you some, kind of rough estimates of what to put in so you can calculate the costs.
Mike, once we get down to the pallet information, can you walk us through what should be done in here?
Yeah, definitely. So we won't know as a freight forwarder the exact dimensions and weight until we actually palletize it. But if you want to calculate the cost ahead of time, go ahead and put 72 for the dimensions. To calculate the number of pallets, you want to divide the total volume, the CBM, by 1.5.
Okay, so let's say for our example, we have a 10 cubic meters and you recommend dividing by 1.5, which is then 6.66. So we'll put in there 7 pallets, is that right?
Yep, always want to round up.
Great.
And then for the weight per pallet, you want to go ahead and divide the total weight of your shipment by the number of pallets you just calculated, 7 in our case.
All right, in our example, let's say our total shipment weighs 8,000 pounds. We're dividing that by 7 pallets. So it'd be 1,150 pounds per pallet.
Correct.
All right, now underneath section 4 where it says shipping charges, what should I put for the freight ready date and for the freight class?
Yeah, we'll start with the freight class. Go ahead and put 100 there from the dropdown.
Okay,
So go ahead and put today. It's an estimate. You can put any date there.
great. All right, then we can click calculate here to understand what Amazon would charge us to ship these 7 pallets LTL. And for this one, the estimation we're giving is $1,800. If I were to click the box and click accept charges, I would then be charged that. And after doing so, down here in section 5, I see I can print pallet labels. Can you talk to us real quick about the difference between the pallet labels versus the box labels?
Absolutely. So if you imagine a pallet, it's a bunch of cartons on a pallet with saran wrap all around it. So a pallet label is going to be 1 per side of that pallet. So that's going to be 4. Whereas an SPD, carton label is going to be on every single carton in the shipment.
Okay, great. So then what I'm going to do then is go ahead and generate these box labels. I would give these box labels to the factory and have them apply these to each individual carton before it leaves China or wherever your goods are being manufactured at. And then this fee that I'm seeing right here, $1,800, this is just an estimation for right now, correct? And I would have you as my freight forwarder go in, enter the real weight, the real size of each pallet, and then go ahead and print the pallet labels to put on yourselves, correct?
Exactly. So that cost is just an estimate. Once it arrives at the freight forwarder's warehouse, we'll be able to palletize it, get the exact dims and weights, enter in that information, download the labels, send it to the warehouse, have them apply it, and then dispatch the trucker to come pick up your shipment.
Excellent. So then I've done all I need to do so far today. Thanks.
You're good to go.
Awesome. So now that we got the shipment squared away, I think that one thing remains. There's probably some questions that new sellers have. Anything that you could cover in this area?
Yeah. A big one that comes up is the bill of lading. So this is basically what releases the goods from your supplier to you. And there's a couple different options. The one that you should use is called a telex release. That allows your supplier to release the goods electronically, like through email. The other option is an original bill of lading, which is an actual piece of paper that needs to be signed, much more complicated. You have to send it around the world. Make sure to ask for a telex release. It's much quicker, easier, and keeps the shipment moving effectively.
And why does the factory need to release the goods to you?
Yeah, so that makes sure that you have actually paid for and have done your part as a seller with them. So it allows the freight forwarder to know that you've actually paid for the shipment and you're allowed to move it. Otherwise, someone could try to move a shipment before even paying for it.
Can you tell me a little bit about customs bonds? Because I've heard that that's a requirement.
Yeah, so there's 2 types of customs bonds. There's a single entry bond and then there's an annual customs bond. So the single entry can only be used for a single entry, so 1 shipment. An annual customs bond, like the name, is good for an entire year. Now, the big difference between that and somewhat like what is heard out there is that maybe you don't need a customs bond if your shipment is under a certain dollar amount. Right now, that's $2,500. So I don't recommend that. I recommend always getting a customs bond. The reason being is that exemption is only for personal shipment, not commercial shipments that you're reselling and making money. Does customs check every shipment for that? No, but it's good to set your business up for success and make sure not to cut corners when it comes to customs. So either get a single entry bond or an annual customs bond with your freight forwarder.
And how do people go about getting these customs bonds? They just ask their freight forwarder, they have to go to some other website to get them?
Yeah, so with Flexport, we have an in-house customs team. It's very simple, provide some basic company information, and we can apply for that annual customs bond for you so you're set up for the year. And we won't issue that bond until your shipment is picked up. That way we get the most out of the year.
Great. When would you recommend going with a single entry versus a annual customs bond?
Yeah, so the cost of an annual customs bond is $350. So I recommend, with us, it's actually all that we offer. We don't offer the single entry. If you're using someone else, maybe they offer it. But I think for the price point, you can ship unlimited amounts of times versus maybe paying $80 to $100 for a single entry. That it just makes sense to get in the beginning.
Great. I know one question that a lot of the audience has to do with tariffs and potential regulation changes with the current administration. Can we speak a little bit about this kind of like changing landscape and how you see it?
Yeah, so tariffs is definitely a hot topic right now. The main thing that I say when it comes to tariffs is that it really has made this peak season come early. Very big companies are a little nervous, I would say, about those affecting their profit margin. So they're shipping a lot of goods in early, along with, carriers having kind of poor financial results in the first couple of quarters. You're seeing rates really increase right now. But as far as, the actual, your shipments, your profit margins should be able to cover that. And then also too, in the market, that is going to get factored in long term, and the prices overall will see increase as they're going to pass that on to their customers. That's
the way I always think about it too. It's like, it's not something that's within my control, so I don't worry about it too much. And just like you said, at the end of the day, I believe the same thing, that the sellers aren't really the one that's going to eat this cost long term. There might be a little bit of funniness with like the pricing and more of like the short term, but long term, most people are getting their goods from a similar location. That price is ultimately just going to be passed along to the customer.
Yeah. Oh, and one last thing, the tariff is based on the commercial amount that you pay your supplier. So it's not based on the price that, you're selling your product on Amazon. And there's a big difference because what you're paying your supplier is definitely less.
All right, cool.
I make my own sound effect.
I love it.
All right, guys, so by now you might be feeling a little bit overwhelmed. We've talked a lot about some fairly deep topics throughout this conversation. We've spoke about Incoterms and customs bonds and a number of other phrases that may be brand new to you. One thing I do want to make sure that you understand is that by hiring a freight forwarder, they handle all these different types of things for you. Throughout this episode, our goal is to make it educational enough so that you understand the different lingo that they might be using and the different things that you need to be thinking about. But at the end of the day, a freight forwarder is the one that's actually going to be filing those different pieces of paperwork, and they're going to be the ones reminding you like, hey, I need this from you now, or don't forget to give me your labels for that. So they'll kind of hold your hand throughout the process. That being said, if there are more questions that haven't been answered throughout this episode, this Thursday we'll be doing a live Ask Me Anything at 3 p.m. Eastern time. I recommend you find Jungle Scout on YouTube, subscribe to us to make sure you're notified of the live stream. That being said, Michael, now that we've made it pretty clear that it's much easier to do this whole process by using a freight forwarder, how do you recommend people go about choosing and vetting freight forwarders?
Yeah, I'd say the big things that I'd be, looking at is, communication. Are they helpful and patient, educational? When you ask a question, do they respond well and in detail? Are they there to really partner with you and help grow your business? It's like any partnership, the same with your supplier. Once you start communicating, you can get a good sense of how that, freight forwarder is running their operation. And then you want to make sure, kind of as we discussed, everything's in-house. You want to really make sure that they have a customs team in-house, that you get a dedicated team that's going to get to know your business and help you move your shipments. They have their own warehouses, just so everything's streamlined in one place. And, if they have technology, that's a really big plus too as well. And so that's the big takeaway for me is, a freight forwarder that's helping Amazon businesses should be very big on the educational side. And really don't be afraid to communicate and ask questions. We get questions all the time, and it's definitely, we are there to help and to serve and to partner. And so those are the key things that I would look for when looking at freight forwarders.
Great. And I personally have been using Flexport for the past few years. That's why I wanted to invite them on to share some information with us. So I can vouch for them, and I have had a good experience. My favorite thing actually about Flexport is that the online platform that you guys have is, like, as far as I know, like the only one in the industry doesn't seem like it was built 50 years ago. I don't know. So that's really nice.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, you have your shipping schedule there. And if there's any changes, we let you know. And that's part of it, just having a transparent system. So you just know what to expect, where your shipment is, and when it's going to get to where it's going.
All right, Michael, you dropped some serious knowledge on us, and I learned a lot. And I'm ready to do this. Are we ready to do this, Greg?
Let's do it.
All right, but one thing's missing. I want my discount. What's that discount?
Oh yeah, let me check here. Okay. Oh yeah, okay, so we got something big for you. So anyone coming from Jungle Scout is gonna get $300 off their first shipment with Flexport.
Sweet.
So it's very exciting. The link to get that discount will be in the description below the video.
Fantastic. And if you guys aren't familiar, we're doing the Amazon Seller Seed Fund, where you can enter and win up to $2,500 to help you get started on your business. If you're interested in entering, which is very easy to do, I don't know why you wouldn't, we'll include the link right somewhere about here. Thank you guys very much for tuning in for this episode. Mike, thank you very much for having on. It's been fantastic. It's been awesome recording with you, Rolando. If you're enjoying the $1 Million Case Study, I recommend you subscribe to our YouTube channel so you'll be notified of upcoming videos, and hit that like button if you've enjoyed it. Thanks for tuning in. See you guys.
Keep crushing it, Freedom Builders.